Chapter 17 of The Shack. Only 2 more chapters to go. Even though Mac carried the burden of Missy's body back to the cabin, the time passed quickly. When they arrived at the shack, I think it cut the front off, so I'll say hello again. This is chapter 17 of The Shack. Even though Mac carried the burden of Missy's body back to the cabin, the time passed quickly. When they arrived at the shack, Jesus and Sarayu were waiting by the back door. Jesus gently relieved him of his burden, and together they went to the shop where he had been working. Mac had not entered here since his arrival, and was surprised at its simplicity. Light, streaming through large windows, caught and reflected wood dust still hanging in the air. The walls and workbenches, covered with all manner of tools, were organized to easily facilitate the shop's activities. This was clearly the sanctuary of a master craftsman. Directly before them stood his work, a masterpiece of art in which to lay the remains of Missy. As Mac walked around the box, he immediately recognized the etchings in the wood. On closer examination, he discovered that details of Missy's life were carved into the wood. He found an engraving of Missy with her cat, Judith. There was another of Mac sitting in a chair reading Dr. Seuss to her. All the family were visible in scenes worked into the sides and top. Nan and Missy making cookies, the trip to Wallowa Lake with the tram ascending the mountain, and even Missy colouring at the camp table, along with an accurate representation of the ladybug pin the killer had left behind. There was even an accurate representation of Missy, standing and smiling as she looked into the waterfall, knowing her daddy was on the other side. Interspersed throughout were flowers and animals that were Missy's favourites. Mac turned and hugged Jesus, and as they embraced, Jesus whispered into his ear, "Missy helped. She picked out what she wanted on it." Mac's grip tightened. He couldn't let go for a long while. "We have the perfect place prepared for her body," Sarayu said, sweeping past. "Mackenzie, it is in our garden." With great care, they gently placed the remains of Missy into the box, laying her on a bed of soft grasses and moss, and then filled it full with the flowers and spices from Sarayu's pack. Closing the lid, Jesus and Mac each easily picked up an end and carried it out, following Sarayu into the garden, to the place in the orchard that Mac had helped clear. There, between cherry and peach trees, surrounded by orchids and daylilies, a hole had been dug, right where Mac had uprooted the flowering shrub the day before. Papa was waiting for them. Once the crafted box was placed gently into the ground, Papa gave Mac a huge hug, which he returned in kind. Sarayu stepped forward. "I," she said with a flourish and bow, "am honoured to sing Missy's song, which she wrote just for this occasion." And she began to sing, with a voice like an autumn wind, a sound of turning leaves and forests slowly slumbering, the tones of oncoming night, and a promise of new days dawning. It was the haunting tune that he had heard her and Papa humming before, and Mac now listened to his daughter's words. "Breathe in me deep, that I might breathe and live, and hold me close, that I might sleep, soft held by all you give. Come kiss me, wind, and take my breath, till you and I are one, and we will dance among the tombs until all death is gone, and no one knows that we exist, wrapped in each other's arms, except the one who blew the breath me safe from harm. Come kiss me, wind, and take my breath, till you and I are one, and we will dance among the tombs until all death is gone. As she finished, there was silence, and then God, all three, simultaneously said, Amen. Mac echoed the Amen, picking up one of the shovels and, with help from Jesus, began filling in the hole, covering the box in which Missy's body rested. When the task was complete, Sarayu reached within her clothing and withdrew her small, fragile bottle. From it, she poured out a few drops of the precious collection into her hand and began to carefully scatter Mac's tears onto the rich black soil under which Missy's body slept. The droplets fell like diamonds and rubies, and wherever they landed, flowers instantly burst upward and bloomed in the brilliant sun. Sarayu then paused for a moment, looking intently at one pearl resting in her hand, a special tear, and then dropped it into the center of the plot. Immediately, a small tree broke through the earth and began unbending itself from the spot, young and luxurious and stunning, growing and maturing until it burst into blossom and bloom. Sarayu then, in her whispery, breeze-blown way, turned and smiled at Mac, who had been watching, transfixed. It is a tree of life, Mac, growing in the garden of your heart. Papa came up next to him and put his arm over his shoulder. Missy is incredible. You know that. Truly, she loves you. I miss her terribly. It still hurts so much. I know, Mackenzie. I know. It was a little after noon, by the path of the sun, when the four left the garden and re-entered the cabin. There was nothing prepared in the kitchen, nor was there any food on the dining table. Instead, Papa led them all into the living room, where on the coffee table sat a glass of wine and a loaf of freshly baked bread. They sat down, except Papa, who remained standing. He directed his words to Mac. Mackenzie, he began, we have something for you to consider. While you have been with us, you have been healed much and have learned much. I think that's an understatement, Mac chuckled. Papa smiled. We are especially fond of you, you know. But here is the choice for you to make. You can remain with us and continue to grow and learn, or you can return to your other home, to Nan and to your children and friends. Either way, we promise to always be with you, although this way is a little more overt and obvious. Max sat back and thought about it. What about Missy? He asked. Excuse me. Well, if you choose to stay, Papa continued, you will see her this afternoon. She will come too. But if you choose to leave this place, then you will also be choosing to leave Missy behind. This is not an easy choice, Max sighed. There was silence in the room for several minutes as Papa allowed Mac the space to struggle with his own thoughts and desires. Finally, Mac asked, what would Missy want? Although she would love to be with you today, she lives where there is no impatience. She does not mind waiting. I'd love to be with her. He smiled at the thought. But this would be so hard on Nan and my other children. Let me ask you something. Is what I do back home important? Does it matter? I really don't do much other than working and caring for my family and friends. Sorry, you interrupted him. Mac, if anything matters, then everything matters. Because you are important. Everything you do is important. Every time you forgive, the universe changes. Every time you reach out and touch a heart or a life, the world changes. With every kindness and service, seen or unseen, my purposes are accomplished and nothing will ever be the same again. Okay, Max said with finality. Then I'll go back. I don't think that anyone will ever believe my story, but if I go back, I know that I can make some difference, no matter how little that difference might be. There are a few things I want to do anyway. He paused and looked from one to the other, then grinned. You know, they all laughed. And I really do believe that you will never leave me or abandon me, so I'm not afraid to go back. Well, maybe a little. That, said Papa, is a very good choice. He beamed at him, sitting down next to him. Now Sarayu stood in front of Mac and spoke. Mackenzie, now that you are going back, I have one more gift for you to take. What is it? Mac asked, curious about anything that Sarayu might give. It is for Kate, she said. Kate? Exclaimed Mac, realizing that he still carried her as a burden in his heart. Please, tell me. Kate believes that she is to blame for Missy's death. Mac was stunned. What Sarayu had told him was so obvious. It made perfect sense that Kate would blame herself. She had raised the paddle that started the sequence of events that led to Missy being taken. He couldn't believe the thought had never even crossed his mind. In one moment, Sarayu's words opened up a new vista into Kate's struggle. Thank you so much, he told her, his heart full of gratitude. Now he had to go back for sure, even if it were only for Kate. She nodded and smiled and sort of sat down. Finally, Jesus stood and reached up to one of the shelves to bring down Mac's little tin box. Mac, I thought you might want this. Mac took it from Jesus and held it in his hands a moment. Actually, I don't think I'm going to need this anymore, he said. Can you keep it for me? All my best treasures are now hidden in you anyway. I want you to be my life. I am, came the clear and true voice of assurance. Without any ritual, without ceremony, they savoured the warm bread and shared the wine and laughed about the stranger moments of the weekend. He knew it was over and time for him to head back and figure out how to tell Nan about everything. He had nothing to pack. His few belongings that had appeared in his room were gone, presumably back in his car. He changed out of his hiking clothes and put on the clothes he had come in, freshly laundered and neatly folded. As he finished dressing, he grabbed his coat off a wall hook and then took one last look around his room before heading out. God, the servant, he chuckled, but then felt a welling up again as the thought made him pause. It is more truly God, my servant. When Mac returned to the living room, the three were gone. A steaming cup of coffee waited for him by the fireplace. He hadn't had a chance to say goodbye, but as he thought about it, saying goodbye to God seemed a little silly. It made him smile. He sat down on the floor with his back to the fireplace and took a sip of the coffee. It was wonderful, and he could feel its warmth travel down his chest. Suddenly, he was exhausted, the myriad emotions having taken their toll. As if his eyes had a will of their own, they closed, and Mac slipped softly and gently into a comforting sleep. The next sensation he felt was cold, icy fingers reaching through his clothing and chilling his skin. He snapped awake and scrambled clumsily to his feet, his muscles sore and stiff from lying on the floor. Looking around, he quickly saw that everything was back to the way it had been 2 days earlier, even down to the bloodstain near the fireplace where he had been sleeping. He jumped up and ran out of the battered door and onto the broken porch. The shack once again stood old and ugly, doors and windows rusted and broken. Winter covered the forest and the trail leading back to Willie's jeep. The lake was barely visible through the surrounding vegetation of tangled briars and devil's club. Most of the jetty had sunk, and only a few of the larger pylons and attached sections were still standing. He was back in the real world. Then he smiled to himself. It was more likely he was back in the unreal world. He pulled on his coat and tracked his way back to his car, following his old footprints, which were still visible in the snow. As Mac reached the car, a fresh light snow began to fall. The drive back into Joseph was uneventful, and he arrived in the dark of a winter's evening. He topped up his tank, grabbed a bite of nominally tasting food, and tried to call Nan, unsuccessfully. She was probably on the road, he told himself, and mobile coverage could be sketchy at best. Mac resolved to drive by the police station and see if Tommy was in, but after a slow loop revealed no activity inside, he decided against going in. How could he explain what had happened to Nan, let alone Tommy? At the next crossroads, the light turned red, and he pulled to a stop. He was tired, but at peace, and strangely exhilarated. He didn't think he would have any problem staying awake on the long journey home. He was anxious to get home to his family, especially Kate. Lost in thought, Max simply pulled through the intersection when the light turned green. He never even saw the other driver run the opposing red light. There was only a brilliant flash of light and then nothing, except silence and inky blackness. In a split second, Willie's red jeep was destroyed. In minutes, fire and rescue and the police arrived, and within hours, Mac's broken and unconscious body was delivered by life flight to Emmanuel Hospital in Portland, Oregon.